There you go. Turn to Genesis chapter 1, please. And I know we don't normally do that in Sunday school, but could I have everyone stand, please, if you're able? First book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. And God's word says, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." Heavenly Father, we thank you for your wondrous creation. We thank you for the earth and in our lives and this whole universe that you have created is a testament to your glory and your power. Please help us to understand further your power and your love for us. And please help me, Lord, be a help to some folks and an edification for some folks, and help me explain your truth as best I can. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Please have a seat. So this morning in the Sunday school hour, I'm going to be speaking about creation versus evolution. Now, I feel like I need to tell you guys a little bit about how this came about, because most of you know we've been coming to this church, we talked about this morning, 6 years and going on 7. And so I know a lot of you folks, and a lot of you folks have been coming here longer than we have. But this is, I believe, the 6th time that I've stood behind this pulpit. And, you know, I came up here and I would teach a lesson or sermon or whatever you want to call it, and I never got any feedback. Nobody ever said anything. And, you know, in my mind, I'm going, well, did Jim listen to it? You know, what does the preacher think about that? You know, but finally, last spring, I said something to Brother Lepar. He's my go-to guy. And I said, you know, could I get a little feedback? And sure, yeah. And so one afternoon, we sat back there in the tech area, and he had gone through the YouTube video and taken some notes, and we had a very, very good conversation. And he challenged me on a few points and said, well, what exactly were you talking about when you said this and other things? Well, at one point in that lesson, I had said that I was looking through a telescope with one of my good friends, and this was decades ago. We were out in the middle of a field. I lived in the country. He brought his telescope out. We were checking out some stuff. I knew nothing about astronomy at the time. And we were looking at the Andromeda galaxy, and I made the comment behind the pulpit that my friend said that light that was hitting my eye was 100,000 years old. And we sat back there and we got to that, and Brother Parr said, well, why does it have to be that old? I don't know. And then we had a discussion about that, and he said, well, according to what I've been able to find out, its creation is probably no more than 10,000 years old. And I sat there. Have you ever had one of those moments where in your brain, it goes, you know nothing about this subject, but you have to find out? That was one of those moments. I looked him right in the eye. I was like, all this time, you know, I teach history mostly, but I do teach geography. All this time, I had never even looked at it. I knew the debate was there. You know, whenever the kids ask me, well, I'm no monkey's uncle. You know, I don't think I came from any apes. But I never really looked at it. I never investigated. I never said, okay, what is the evidence and what is being said about this evidence? And so right then and there, I knew I had to figure it out. I dropped whatever book I was reading, and I said, okay. And in our library this is probably the best resource I have found. It's the Modern Creation Trilogy, written by father and son Henry Morris and John Morris. They are also leaders of the Institute for Creation Research. Both these guys are highly educated, and I got into it as well as a couple other books, and I'm on my 6th book right now. I'll reference that here in a little bit, about this debate, what the evidence is, and what's being said on both sides, and conclusions, and so on and so forth. It was a real eye-opener for me. I never knew. I had never looked at it. And once I did, I was like, wow. I am left with, I tell you, I can't stand up here and say I am unbiased. Can't do it, because of my faith. And so I do go into it with some bias. But when I try to look at it in an unbiased way, I can tell you with all honesty, the vast majority of evidence, scientific evidence, is heavily skewed towards creation. And I'm left with no conclusion that there are many very smart scientists in the world that are willfully ignorant. They cannot take a position that will allow for God. By no means can they do that and retain prestige and respect in the eyes of their peers. And I'll get into some more of that a little bit later, but that's kind of how this came about. But also, the clicker. Uh-oh. Okay, thank you, sir. I'm not here to convince the crowd here, I don't think. Like I said, we've been coming here for a few years. I know that in this community, I'm in the company of believers. Maybe some folks online that might watch it, and this might help convince them. But my goal here today is to inform. Amen. And maybe some of you have not taken the time to read and investigate this like I have since spring. And so maybe you'll learn some new things, things maybe you haven't considered before. And all I can do really is show you what I found out. And hopefully that'll be a help to you. One thing you need to know is that this debate is nothing new. It did not begin with Charles Darwin. In fact, Darwin, it didn't start with Darwin anyway. Darwin's grandfather was speaking and writing about natural selection before Charles Darwin was even born. Nothing new is in The Origin of Species, which was the book published in 1859 by Darwin. In fact, there's an evolutionist quoted as saying he doesn't even explain natural selection in his book of that title. But that's a whole nother conversation. I'm not up here to slam Charles Darwin. What I am up here to say is this debate is thousands of years old. If you say, okay, evolution, where did life start? Well, it started in the ocean. It started in water. If we go back to the oldest origin text ever written down, and by that I mean not Genesis, I mean pagan origin story, where did life begin? In the ocean. Hasn't changed much over the millennia. And something else to realize is that this is the only origin story that starts with nothing. Right. Starts with God. Right. All other origin stories start with the ocean or some sort of matter already in existence. I don't know what you can make out of that, but it does make the eyebrows rise just a little bit. I guess I better get these out to help myself out a little bit. Now, the preacher has spent many weeks preaching to us in Sunday school about being peacemakers. And part of my purpose up here is to maybe help you guys, and me more than anybody, maybe how to engage somebody who either believes and supports evolution, or maybe is sitting on the fence about the whole deal. Or maybe is saying, well, I'm not going to worry about it. And I'll tell you about somebody that I met that had that attitude here in a little while. But you need to keep in mind that Christ died for all men. Even the evolutionists. Even the terrorists. Even the worst people walking around or locked up in our planet. Christ died for them too. And getting in an argument with an evolutionist is probably not going to help keep the peace. But if we know something about the debate, if we know what the evidence is, then we can ask those questions that will perhaps engage these people, and that might be a path in bringing them to Christ. So that's kind of also why I'm up here today. So I need a volunteer from the audience. But not just anybody. It has to be a particular kind of person. Is there anybody in the audience who was saved as a young person? I got one over here. Steve, you were saved as a young man. Now let me ask you this question. What would it take to get you to be a believer in evolution?
I'd have to find it in the Bible.
You'd have to find it in the Bible.
That's right.
Okay. There we go. You're going to find evolutionists that have the same sort of attitude. They're not going to be easy to convince. Even if you show them, even if God helped you, created a miracle through you, there's still folks that wouldn't believe. There's people that have been brought up with evolution, and I know for some Christians, it's like, you're not going to change my mind. My faith in God is concrete, and it's going to stay that way. There's evolutionists the same way. They are the same way. And so it can be incredibly hard, and all you can do is try to, give your best argument, If you meet somebody like that, say a swift prayer, God help me, say the right thing, and try to help these people. But you want to keep in mind, as the preacher says, you want to be meek about it, you want to keep your cool about it, and the more we know about both sides of the debate, the more we can engage these people and ask some questions. And I've engaged both of the 7th grade science teachers at the middle school, and I'll tell you kind of how that's going here in a little bit. All right, I want you to look. Now what I do?
Just click it again.
Mark's not there.
No, there's a silence button. All right, mute button.
There we go. Thank you, sir.
So you can turn the screen off.
Okay, thank you. I think I hit it on the pulpit here. All right, now I don't know if this is going to be easy for you people to see in the back. I'll kind of point out what this is. I've got two charts here. This chart on the left, views about human evolution by religion. And along the left side here, we've got white evangelist Protestant, black Protestant, Hispanic Catholic, white Catholic, unaffiliated, and white mainland Protestant. Well, you know as well as I do, race doesn't really matter. No. If God doesn't care about race, why should we? But, and I don't know the difference between white evangelist Protestant and white mainland Protestant. I don't know the difference. I guess there is one. But anyway, what we can see is the orange, humans existed in the present form since the beginning. That was the question. And then there's a gray area that says a supreme being guided evolution. Yeah, I know. In other words, yes, God created man, but he used evolution to do it. And then there's the blue, which says evolution, humans came about through evolution, through natural processes. There was no God involved. So we can see, and we could probably include the gray area with the blue. Sure. God doesn't like fence setters. And we can see that the majority is skewed towards God did not create people as we are. Probably not a surprise to some of you. If we look at the chart on the right, we see along the bottom a list of countries. The United States is there. The rest of the countries are European countries with the exception of Japan and Turkey. So with the United States, the question is, human beings, or the statement, human beings as we know them, developed from earlier species of animals. In other words, evolution is true. And you could pick true, not sure, or false. So we can see the vast majority of European countries agreed with evolution. And we can include the pink area, the not sure, the fence sitters. We can include those with siding with evolution. Vast majority of people in Europe, and this is only, okay, well, they're both about the same age. So this is about 9 years old, this information, about 9 years old. Vast majority of Europeans believe in evolution. And if we look at Japan, vast majority of Japanese believe in evolution. Now, I could go on for a while about Japanese people, their history, and their religion, but I don't have time. We look at the United States, and again, about a third of Americans that were asked this question, about a third said, no, God created man. But 2/3 are either, well, no, it was evolution, or, well, I don't really know. It was the Muslim country, Turkey, where the majority of people said, no, God created man. So we need to understand that we are in the minority. We're fighting the uphill battle. But I guess that shouldn't be a surprise to us. God told us that. We try to find and go through the narrow gate. And we try not to stumble down that broad path to destruction, that broad road that most people are going down. Satan is the real enemy. And yeah, he uses humans, probably in perverted imitation of God who uses humans. But we need to try to save who we can. With the understanding that Matthew 12:30 says, he that is not with me is against me, and he that gathereth not with me scattereth abroad. God's not for the fence sitters, and there is no middle ground, there is no gray area. You're either with God or you're not. And we need to understand that and try to help those people that are not for God. 1 Peter 3:15 says, but sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear. So, understanding this debate is important. Understanding what the evidence is and what's being said about it and what's been found about it, because a lot of this is using science, is important if we're going to help win people over to Christ. You want to enter the conversation. If you find yourself in a conversation where the topic comes up and the other person's on the fence or a supporter of evolution, you want to enter the conversation with the hope of strengthening a relationship, of maybe opening that door, of reaching truth. Don't see it as a battle. Don't see it as a debate. Because once you start down that road, it's hard to pull back. It's hard for the other side to say, ooh, this is a debate, this is an argument. And that's not going to help you. Now, folks, we need to have a definition here. We need to understand what we're talking about. There really only are two models of the origin of life. And I'm going to just talk about the origin of life here on this slide, and then we're moving on. Because origin of life is really a whole giant conversation by itself. But creation model pretty much says God created the cosmos and mankind in 6 earth days, set everything into motion, and rested on the 7th day. This creation was recent. Extinct species, including the fossil record, and current earth conditions can be explained by a global flood, because that was a major event. That changed a lot of things. It restarted some things. And when you talk about earth origins and the conditions of earth today, as believers, we need to take that into account. That's part of the debate. Because part of the evidence that evolutionists use directly involves this flood. For evolution, they claim that life began from inorganic materials. Inorganic means it was not alive. Life began from inorganic materials in microscopic cells in the ocean over vast amounts of time, Simple life evolved into complex life that has resulted in mankind. Extinct species and current Earth conditions are the result of hundreds of millions of years of a changing Earth. Now, I don't really have a slide about it. There's a lot of things I don't have in here because the topic is huge. But 150 years ago, evolutionists, the early evolutionists of the 19th century, they had the age of the cosmos around 50,000 years. But as time has gone by and more evidence is accumulated and more scientists have looked at this issue, they've had to push it back further and further and further. They say, oh, wait a minute, this doesn't work. We need more time. Yeah. Until now, the current age is about 6 billion years. We need at least 6 billion years for evolution to work. Well, how does evolution work, we ask? Well, it goes so slow you can't see it. Okay, it goes so slow we can't see it. This is science, right? Yes, this is science. Well, can we test for it? Nope. Can't test for it. Evolution is a belief system. Now, I can't stand here and prove scientifically using human science that God created everything. Faith wouldn't mean much, would it? Right. Faith wouldn't mean much, and I'm pretty sure faith is pretty important to God. God wants the people that love him on faith and are willing to sacrifice for it. Evolution is kind of the same thing. It's a belief system. It's a belief system. I try to tell people that. What? No. It's because evolution has pervaded almost every aspect of our culture. I never knew how deep it went until I started looking at it. And I went, whoa, I never even noticed that before. Evolution has pervaded every aspect of our culture, from science all the way to entertainment. You almost can't get away from it. If you watch TV, read a newspaper, or listen to the radio, you almost can't get away from it. So how does evolution work anyway? Let's start looking at some of the evidence. I will run out of time, and I've got 25 slides, so I do have to move kind of quick here. Well, 170 years ago, it was natural selection. Now, Charles Darwin published his book, Origin of Species, in 1859, but he was not the first one to be talking about natural selection as the mechanism for evolution. And remember, through all this thing, the human imagination plays a big role. Natural selection has been revealed as being only horizontal variation within a species. Now, the difference between horizontal variation and vertical evolution is that animals, as God created them, can change over time. Their offspring can vary in their attributes to help them survive in their environment. God made all things and it was good. They were made to survive within their environment. And they do. Animals are good at surviving. And they can adapt to their environment. We know things can change. We know things can change. Now, at one point in our past, God changed things so radically that he decided to take one of every kind with the breath of life in it and save it on the ark. But we know animals can change, they can vary, they can adapt. And that's what natural selection does. It does not say, okay, this fish is going to develop lungs and breathe air. It's going to go from the ocean, it's going to go on land, it's going to turn from a fish into a reptile. That's not natural selection. So, and today, evolutionists know this today. They've had enough time and gathered enough evidence, they're saying, okay, natural selection isn't what we're using anymore. That's not working for us. And something else I want to mention, because it's important, the idea of evolution has been nothing but harmful to humans. The idea of survival of the fittest, the strong will survive, Well, if you believe that, then that puts me in competition with everybody else, doesn't it? Only the strong. I need to be strong. Why? So I can survive. That means there's going to be conflict. Conflict for resources. Conflict for land. Conflict for wealth. Conflict to survive. That's what evolution says. And the theory of eugenics developed right alongside, maybe even came from evolution. Eugenics was the misguided theory that some races of humans are naturally more advanced than other races. This was a theory that was spread through Europe, was very popular in Europe. It led to Nazi Germany. And we know what happened there. Now, since then, eugenics has been proven to be a myth. Eugenics is a failed theory that no sane person, and any person with common sense, realizes that theory holds no weight, holds no water, and it should be cast aside. Rightfully, it should have been cast aside a long time ago. But people that were not believers with a lot of money and power were able to push that idea along with evolution. And even though eugenics has died out, evolution has only gotten stronger. Notice the subtitle of Darwin's book. The title is The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, but the subtitle says Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. If that's not pitting people against each other, I don't know what is. In order for evolution to be true, simple life forms must be able to turn into more complex life forms. In order for evolution to be true, that has to happen. But evolutionists to this day have not been able to explain how that happens. Natural selection isn't it. They realize that, even though a lot of people bring that up right off the bat. You would think, after all these hundreds of millions of years, that the ground of the earth would be replete with fossils showing transitory animals. Oh, look, we can see by these fossils this fish is turning into a reptile. And if it took so long for that to happen, why wouldn't the ground be full of fossils showing that? In fact, they've not been able to find any. They've gotten so desperate, they've latched onto a couple of fossils and says, look, this is it. But when a hard look is taken at those fossils, which we're going to look at them, then you can say, well, wait a minute, what about this? And when it's a PhD scientist that says that, asks that question, wait a minute, what about this? Hush, hush, hush. No, we're not going to bring that up because that weakens our stance. If I'm an evolutionist, I want to silence those voices. And the people that publish scientific papers, so we're not going to publish your paper. You're not on our side. That hardly sounds fair. It hardly sounds scientific to me. Right. What we need to understand is that God created things and they multiplied after their own kind. Those animals that God put on the ark, they were animals meant to repopulate the earth after their own kind. Nothing turned into something else. If we look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 20 through 25, it says, "And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creatures that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, with the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good." Verse 22, "And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters and the seas, and let fowl multiply in the earth." And the evening and morning were the fifth day. And God said in verse 24, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, the beast of the earth after his kind, and it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. This is horizontal variation. We got, humans over thousands of years have manipulated the different kinds of animals. Selective breeding, both plants and animals today. And it's very easy to look around and see that. And you can't look at it and say, oh, that's evolution. No, I'm afraid it's not. I grew up with hounds. And I could tell a lot of stories about hounds, but then I'd run out of time. Here's an example of horizontal variation. These are all hounds. But I think you'll agree with me that Rhodesian Ridgeback is quite a bit different than that Dachshund. Yep. But it's still after their own kind. Now, some people have said, well, all God had to do was put 2 wolves on that ark, and all the dogs varied from that. I don't know if that's true or not. What I know is true is that God creating things after their kind.
Right.
This is not evolution. This is variation. That's all that is. But a lot of people are so desperate, scientists just as much as anybody in here, they're so desperate to keep God out of it, keep God out of the equation, that they come up with anything they can to support evolution. Talking about the flood, for us, for believers, the flood happened. And it was, make no mistake, it was a dramatic event. It was changing. It was earth-changing. And I'm looking at Genesis chapter 7, verse 13. In the selfsame day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them into the ark. They and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, every bird of every sort. And they went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. And verse 16, and they that went in, male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. After their own kind is not evolution. I have one slide here about mutation, because for a long time, mutation was the mechanism that evolutionists wanted to use to prove evolution. We know cells can mutate for whatever reason. And scientists for a long time, at least over half a century, have used chemicals, radiation, just anything they can think of to try to induce mutations in living things. Fruit flies are a favorite creature to use because their gestation period is only 12 days. So they can get a lot of generations of fruit flies, and they're trying to prove evolution through mutation. And all those poor fruit flies, among other animals, all these years, all those generations, and the only mutations they can come up with are either neutral, which means it's a mutation, it doesn't really make a difference in the life of that fruit fly, or harmful. In other words, this offspring was born in a way that is not helpful at all, maybe even harmful to their survival, or deadly. They just died because of the mutation. Never once has anybody been able to say, look, here's a mutation that is helpful, and this creature's morphing into something else. It's going to be a higher life form, a more complex life form. Never once has anybody ever resulted in that. Mutation is never beneficial. Mutation is either neutral, harmful, or deadly. So mutation, as they figured out by now for evolutionists, mutation is not the mechanism of evolution. What is? If it's not natural selection and it's not mutation, what could it be? I I thought about it before I did it, but I engaged the 2 7th grade science teachers at school. One's a young man. He just got married yesterday, and we went to his wedding. It was a happy occasion. And the other is a young lady, and I was waiting for the right moment, I guess. I don't know. I didn't know how they believed. I just was curious. I wanted to know. And I met him at the copier. And we're standing there, he's copying stuff, I'm waiting for the copier, which takes up about a third of all teachers' lives, I think. And I broached the subject. Immediately, evolution, no, it's evolution. And the first thing I said, I was like, how? Vestigial organs, what about that old appendix? And I was like, well, actually, now, the leading scientists that are experts of the human body think the appendix does play a role in the early life of a human being, and it does play a role in the chemical balances of maturity and things of that nature. And he quickly left that. I don't know if he did that because he knew, and then he didn't think I knew, or I'm not sure why he did that. I don't know. But as far as vestigial organs are concerned, it's probably just a result of our ignorance as human beings. The formal list of human organs that were considered vestigial organs 100 years ago, or it was almost 100 organs. In other words, a century ago, the best leading scientists that were experts on the human body said, well, there's 100 organs in the human body that have no function, left over from when we were apes. And since that time, scientists have said, oh, wait a minute, this does perform a function. And now the list has dwindled to almost nothing and does not include the appendix. The appendix does something for us. We may not understand it all, but at least we understand enough right now that we can say, okay. Because, see, here's the thing with vestigial organs. People can say, well, God created something what they didn't need. It's not perfect. God created something not perfect. Oh, that's a problem for you religious leaders, isn't it? No, it's not a problem. The problems crop up for evolutionists, but for believers, there's really not a problem at all, as we'll see. All right, and I've got to move on to the fossil record. Now, the fossil record, I'm not going to spend much time here. If you want to learn more about that, because this is something I was very interested in, I say, okay, when I went to teach at the Orthodox Jewish Boys' School, I got interviewed by the rabbis before they gave me that job. And I made a claim and said, well, I'm a Christian. And they said, well, we believe this, the fossil record notwithstanding, was their comment. Well, that comment, notwithstanding, is pretty much saying, we're ignoring that. And I was like, well, no, you can't ignore it. I mean, the evidence is there. There's museums full of it. The dinosaurs existed. And then I was asked the question by Brother LeVar, well, why did they have to be so old? I don't know. And so I found out. Well, in order to create a fossil, something has to be buried cataclysmically. It has to be buried wholly and quickly. Things that die and lie on the forest floor don't turn into fossils. Things that are covered quickly, usually by a cataclysm, volcanic eruption, global flood maybe, whatever it was, the fossils that we find, whether they're dinosaur or modern creatures, were buried suddenly, and which makes it kind of interesting. You say, oh, we found these fossils of this dinosaur. Yeah, in the same layer, we found the fossil of a cow. Because, see, sometimes they use circular reasoning. They say, well, we can date this layer of the earth by the fossils that are found in it. And then we can go over here to this other country, and they say, well, we can date these fossils by the layer of ground that they're in. Wait a minute. That's circular reasoning. Can't do that. Can't do that. If evolution were true, why haven't we found the transitory fossils that show evolution? Because when you speak about that, there should be more fossils of transition than there are of the beginning and end product. But there's not. These large animals, if we're just talking about the fossil record, these large animals appear suddenly. And the evolutionists admit to that. They can't explain it. But we can. God created them. The evolutionists cannot admit that. That's something you have to understand about them. They simply can't do that. They have to come up with something else. They have to face these problems and come up with something because they can't admit to God. Now here is a very popular one. Archaeopteryx. Several of these have been found since this one. This one was found 15, 20 years ago, I think. And immediately evolutionists went, evolution! Because this is a winged creature. Whatever species it was doesn't exist today as far as we know. But there were several things about this fossil that evolutionists leaped on it like a dog on raw meat. They say, well, it's got feathers. It's got teeth in its mouth. In other words, this thing was fly. It was bird-like, but it had teeth. Well, you can't really use that. No, there are no birds today running around that have teeth. That's true. But there are reptiles with no teeth, such as the turtle.
Yeah.
So you can't really use teeth as proof of evolution. What about those wing claws? This fossil has wing claws. Say, well, that's proof right there. Well, no, because there are some birds with wing claws. They don't really use them. Ostriches have wing claws. But as far as we know, there's no function. There might be a function we haven't observed yet. So you can't really use the wing claws. It had a tail. It had a feathered tail, which no birds today have a flesh tail. That's true. There are no birds today that have a fleshy tail. That one did. Feathers are well developed and not transitional. In other words, if we look at this creature and we try to look at unbiased way, we just look at it as it is, yeah, it's got feathers, yeah, it can probably fly, but experts on feathers, on birds, have looked at this and said those feathers are highly developed. There's nothing on this fossil that says, okay, well, that's scales and this is feathers. You can see where it's transitioning. No. This has highly developed feathers. It is more likely that this is an extinct species rather than some transitory creature going from reptile to bird. So when you look at the evidence, you try to look at it unbiasedly, you're not seeing evolution. More than likely, it's an extinct species. That's what the evidence seems to indicate. Now, we love to watch nature shows. And so, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this. The platypus, it's a strange one. It's got properties of a mammal, properties of a bird, and properties of an amphibian, I think. It's cool. All right, so evolutionists and creationists don't know what to think of this one. For the next one, I'm going to stand by my guns on this. You know, I looked through the Bible. I could find nowhere where it said God laughed. Huh?
That's why it makes flies.
Say again?
That's why it makes flies.
Oh, well, I beg to differ. I have something better. I found nowhere it said Jesus laughed. I haven't found anywhere where it said God smiled. But I have proof that God has a sense of humor. Yes, and I'm sticking by my guns on this one. Me and my wife can both testify that when our German Shepherd sounded like he was getting ready to tear the side off the house, and we were out there in the dead of night with our flashlight going, "Get him, Balrog, get him!" And then he reached under that kiddie pool and pulled out that black and white fur We're standing 5 feet away, and it's like, run! You know God was chuckling on that one. I will try to move quickly. I am about out of time. A few more things to show you, folks.
We have next Sunday, too.
Huh?
We have next Sunday as well.
I will do this. I will get this done.
In other words, you've had enough.
Some people, some evolutionists will look at things like, well, look, this arm is similar. It could be a flipper. Look, this seal has 2 leg and 2 arm flippers. Just like us, we have 2 arms and 2 legs. That's proof of evolution. No, sorry, it's not. God made everything to survive in our environment. He made things to survive in their environment. Any child is proof of this. If you showed him this and said, okay, to this child to say, okay, what's similar about all these animals? They could come up with a pretty quick list. What's different? Oh, well, that one has horns, and that one has tusks. That one has a tail. They say, what's similar? Well, there's a lot similar. They're all about the same size. They all have 4 legs, and they all be looking one way, and the list goes on. Psalms 106:39, thus were they defiled with their own works, and went a-whoring with their own inventions. I have a pretty good imagination, I think, but we have to be careful about that. Now, what about humans? Human evolution has drawn the most attention, but has perhaps the least amount of fossil evidence. In other words, I read one part where he said you could take all of the fossils that people think belong to humans or early humans, and you can fit them right nicely in one coffin. There's just not that much. Now, here's the thing that got me. When they look at some of these fossils and they take their measurements, and these paleoanthropologists, that means people that look at prehistoric humans, they say, well, look at the size of this skull. This small skull meant they had a small brain, which means they were developing from the monkeys. They were developing into humans, which have a bigger brain. There's a problem with that.
Yeah.
The problem is that there are people walking the earth today with the same cranial dimensions. There are people walking the earth today with the same skull dimensions and body dimensions as Neanderthals, as Cro-Magnon, and probably Homo erectus. Now, if you want to talk about Lucy, the famous one of the Leakeys found in Africa, probably an extinct species of ape. The evidence just isn't there. It's not there. But they can't admit that, because if they did, evolution would fall by the wayside, and that must not happen in their world. So what's really going on? Oh, the Morrises do a really good job of making the evolutionists testify against evolution. In other words, he uses evolutionist quotes and what they write and what they say, and says, look, they're admitting it. Evolution is a belief system. And this is a leading evolutionist. He is still in charge of the anthropology department at Harvard. I checked it just the other day. He's still there. I know that at least in paleoanthropology, data are still so sparse that theory heavily influences interpretation. Theories have, in the past, clearly reflected our current ideology instead of the actual data. In other words, our belief system is what we're going with, not the actual facts. That's scary, because these institutions are considered some of the best institutions in the world. Mm-hmm. They are sending a lot of people, a lot of young, impressionable people, onto the rest of their lives with a lie.
Yeah.
That's scary stuff. Isaiah 59:13, in transgressing and lying against the Lord, departing away from our God, speaking oppression and revolt, conceiving and uttering from the heart words of falsehood. 14, and judgment is turned away backward, Justice standeth afar off. Truth is fallen in the street, and equity cannot enter. Equity means fairness. I don't know about you, but that sounds like modern day wokeness to me. Where, oh, word gets out, they're going to have a conservative speaker come to this college campus and give a speech, so we're going to protest, and we're going to protest and cause so much trouble that they cancel that guy from ever coming and speaking. I thought this was a country of free speech. Matthew 15:18. But those things which proceed out of the mouth come forth from the heart, and they defile the man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornication, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. That's what we're seeing. Now this is the one that really got me. Because I spent much of my adult life training to be and being an historian. Not a professional one, but nonetheless a historian. And I love ancient history, ancient military history as well. And so radiocarbon dating played a big part in what I understood about the timeline. To make matters short for you, radiocarbon dating is still being used widely to date things that are old. You can only date something that was once living, like a plant or an animal thing. That's why you can radiocarbon date a fire pit, where you can find what people ate and all that, and do that because it was wood and stuff like that. But this is based on the false assumption that carbon-14 has reached a steady state. What happens is the sun's energy comes into our atmosphere, hits a nitrogen, turns it into carbon-14. It's in the air, it's in the earth. Living things breathe that in or eat it, and they get carbon-14. Well, when that living thing dies, carbon-14 immediately begins to turn back into nitrogen at a steady pace that can be measured. The problem is, if you're going to take that measurement, you have to assume that carbon-14 has reached a steady state. And that's only true if the Earth is old. But when measurements were taken, this is what got me. Whenever you take a measurement, it shows that the steady state has not been reached. But that is ignored by people. It's ignored. I have to move on. According to the scientific, and this might be the clincher right here. According to the scientific laws of thermodynamics, neither evolution nor the Big Bang is even possible anyway. The second law of thermodynamics states increasing entropy in everything. In other words, everything eventually breaks down. Everything eventually slows down. Everything eventually stops, if left by itself. If left on its own, it's going to break down eventually. Even if you took something that was spinning with no friction and stuck it in a vacuum, eventually the gravity of the sun would cause it to stop. That's the second law of thermodynamics. It's a scientific law that nobody argues with. Evolutionists conveniently ignore it. A simple life form can't turn into a more complex life form because of entropy. When have you ever, talking about the Big Bang, when have you ever seen an explosion result in order? It would be like if I put dynamite in a cliff, set it off, and all the stone fell down into square blocks and built a house. It's not going to happen. But evolutionists say, well, it did at the Big Bang. It resulted in all these galaxies and stars and planets. Well, it did in evolution. What started as sea slime turned into Beethoven. It can't happen. It's impossible because of entropy. Now, guys, there's a ton of other stuff here. Like I said, this topic is a mountain of evidence. I mean, I didn't even go into moon dust. But if you want more information about this, there are at least a half a dozen books in our library, or you can go to the Institute for Creation Research, and it is a huge library of scientific papers. I mean, you can get all of it you want, and there's plenty left. You can look at it as much as you want to, and you're going to find, like me, that the majority of evidence is pretty heavily skewed towards creation. And I don't understand how these people can call themselves scientists and just ignore that. They haven't come up with a mechanism for evolution. They haven't been able to explain how evolution works. They haven't been able to explain how the Big Bang even banged. But it's not hard for us. It's pretty easy for us. In the beginning, God created. The arrogance and disrespect for God demonstrated by man is global. Willingly or unwillingly, knowingly or unknowingly, the truth is being suppressed globally. And if we look at 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 4, this know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come, for men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, can't control themselves, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. And heaven forbid the evolutionists be accountable to God. Thank you.